Greetings and welcome to week 3 of Mindful Mondays for the month of May 2020. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me for another session of this series called Self-Care for Caregivers. So I would like to start by asking the question for today: how are you taking care of yourself today? I want you to really think about this question because it's not a coincidence that it's the one that I'm starting this week's lesson with, because we are going to think a little bit more about how we are doing that today. But I want you to think about it because if you have already done something that you consider self-care for today, I would love to hear about it. You can share that with me by sending me an email at intentionaleducators@gmail.com. You can tweet me on Twitter at Nicolette James, or you can simply drop by my website, educatezen.org, and shoot me a quick reply. If you haven't done anything for the day that you consider self-care, I would like you to think about what you are going to do, because as I said, this is going to be the focus of our lesson for today. So what have I done today to take care of myself? Today, I took a nice leisurely stroll in my neighborhood park. You know, it's funny how we have so much around us and that we often don't see because it's around us and we pass by it every day. There's a really nice park in my neighborhood and I usually drive right by it. Today, I decided to take a walk and to actually visit that park on foot. And I did so, and it was a lovely experience. So I would consider that my self-care for today. Okay, so before we launch into the content for today's lesson, I want to do a quick recap on last week's session and then bring us forward into today. So last week I shared a definition of mindfulness. I will share another one this morning. So someone asked me, why do you always do that? I teach every lesson that I teach that way. And I feel that it's always good to be grounded in a definition so that we all have an understanding of what a term, and usually terms are very abstract. So, you know, one person might think this, somebody else might think that. So in any concept that there are many different ways of understanding something, I like to start with a definition that can kind of put us on the same page. And the same goes for the concept of mindfulness, which also has so many nuances that for me, I like to choose a definition that actually applies to the lesson that is going to follow. So that's the method of my thinking in terms of definitions. So I will share another one this week. I talked about a few of the common misconceptions about mindfulness. And one of them is that mindfulness is for a particular kind of person. And that usually comes from the fact that people have a particular kind of person in mind whenever they think of someone who might be mindful. And I hoped to dispel that last week when I spoke about the fact that mindfulness is not for any type of person. Mindfulness is for any person that desires to feel better and to be better. So there are so many benefits to mindfulness that if you do want to feel better about your thinking process, about your feelings, about what you actually do and how you do things, then mindfulness is for you, because there are so many benefits of mindfulness. And I shared quite a few of them last week as well. However, I will recap that there are physical benefits. One of the physical benefits of being more mindful is that it lowers your stress level. I don't think there's anyone who cannot benefit from a lower stress level. One of the psychological benefits of mindfulness is that it helps us to perform better cognitively, which means that any thinking process that we have to complete is benefited by a mindfulness practice. So just on those 2 counts alone, there is no type of person that would not benefit positively from practicing and developing a mindfulness practice. I also spoke about some of the similarities and differences between mindfulness and meditation, because that's often another area, a gray area that people kind of get trapped in and allow to stop them from moving forward with the mindfulness practice, because they're thinking that mindfulness is simply meditation, or that meditation is mindfulness. And while they do share a lot of commonalities, they do help each other. Both practices benefit each other. There are some differences. You can be mindful and never meditate. it would be hard to practice meditation and not be mindful, but I guess it is possible at some level. They both complement each other, but mindfulness is more about what we do and how we do what we do, whereas meditation helps us to simply be better at being. So those two things are different, but yet I'm sure you can see how they complement each other and benefit each other. So last week, the theoretical focus was on awareness. So there's so much to talk about in terms of awareness, but we have to start somewhere. So last week I decided to start with awareness of our thoughts, because so much of who we are in the world and what we do in the world starts at the thought level. So in order to start doing anything about what we think, we need to become more aware about what we think. So the practice for last week was becoming more aware of what we think. What we think shows itself to us as the voice that's in our head. There's always a voice in our head that's talking to us sort of on a script or on a loop. And what we want to be able to do is to hear that voice when it speaks and to actually be conscious of that voice speaking and not just let it speak in our head without being aware of it. Because once we are aware of it, we can then start directing or programming or training it to say the things that we need to hear and not always what it wants to tell us. So I spoke a little bit about that. We talked a little bit about awareness in terms of looking at our thoughts and simply becoming more aware of our thoughts. And then I shared the meditation that would help us to do that. So that was last week. So this week, what are we going to talk about today? This week, we're going to talk about who are caregivers. So since the series, the focus of the series for this year, because of the situation we find ourselves in right now, made me think about this idea of caregiving. I wanted the 4-part series to sort of be focused on the caregivers. So we know that we've been thinking a lot about our essential workers and so forth, and how much they are doing right now, and how everyone has been supporting them. But within the construct of essential workers, there are so many people in there that should also be considered. And for me, those people are all of the caregivers during this time. And so that's who I wanted to share the mindfulness practices with this round in this month of May. So today, moving forward, I want to take what we've already spoken about in terms of awareness of our thoughts, and then couple that with today's focus, which is on self-compassion, and the practice for the week that also goes along with the meditation for the week. So who are caregivers? So caregivers is such a huge group. Caregivers are any people, any person, anyone who gives care to another. So for me as an educator, of course, I can't leave out teachers. Teachers are caregivers as well. Nurses, doctors, aides, daughters, wives, husbands, coaches, ministers, pastors, social workers, counselors, husbands, partners, friends, anyone and everyone who takes the time to give care to someone else can be considered a caregiver. Anyone else who takes the time to do good for someone else is a caregiver. I was talking to a friend the other day who was sharing with me that during this pandemic that he has been dropping off groceries for his elderly neighbors. That is giving care. So a lot of us have been focused on doctors and nurses in the last few months. And while they are awesome caregivers and are definitely included, I wanted to expand the notion of a caregiver outside of the people who work to give care. That anyone who is providing care for someone else is also considered a caregiver. So some of the characteristics and commonalities that caregivers share is that they want to help others. Anyone who is a caregiver is a helper. They want to do things that can support the people around them. They usually have a mentality of doing good in the world. They want to do something that makes a difference in the lives of other people. They think of life in terms of paying it forward or giving back or just doing good things. These are some of the characteristics of people who care for others and do things to help others. Some of the traits that caregivers have in common is that usually people who give care to others, they're usually very dependable people. They are the people that others count on a lot. They are the people that others rely on. They tend to be people who are very composed in their nature because they sort of have to hold it together and hold it in order to take care of other people. They tend to be people who are patient, or at least patient towards those to whom they are giving care. They tend to be people who are also very empathetic or good at being empathetic towards other people. And they also tend to be people who are very compassionate. So those are a few of the characteristics and commonalities of people who give care to other people and be considered caregivers themselves. One of the problems that happens with folks who are caregivers is that they experience a few common ailments as well. So if you think about it, a lot of the characteristics that I just spoke about and some of the character traits that people who are caregivers show end up causing a problem. Because while those are all wonderful, wonderful traits and blessings, and those people tend to be a blessing to other people, all of those characteristics come with a lot of burden to bear. Because in order to care for someone else, you have to you typically, if you are a caregiver, in order to care for someone else, you sort of have to put yourself aside. You have to take responsibility. You have to be that person who those people who you take care of depend on. And that sometimes comes with a lot of pressure. It comes with a lot of responsibility, which can be physical responsibility by the nature of doing something for someone else. And it also comes with a lot of emotional responsibility because of the weight of that on the caregivers sometimes becomes a lot to bear. So oftentimes caregivers, or the people who give care to other people, they end up experiencing many problems and many ailments and illnesses. And those things manifest themselves in many different ways. And sometimes it's mentally or emotionally. They find that they are often very tired or fatigued. Sometimes they find that they are very irritable and cannot focus. They're anxious. They're having issues sleeping or sleeping for extended periods, or sometimes they can find themselves actually sleeping way more than they ever slept before, because that's another way that the body is responding or reacting to the pressure of being someone who is always relied upon, someone who is always giving of themselves. So some of the other ways that people who are caregivers manifest the pressure and the burden of being someone who gives care to others is that sometimes they withdraw from others, but not in positive ways to sort of refuel. It's in a negative way where they are withdrawing from others in a way that is bringing them down and not necessarily helping to pick themselves up and to give out of themselves. Sometimes that can be experienced by them also gaining weight, losing weight, experiencing physical illness and pain, such as headaches or bodily pain, or some other physical manifestation of the internal pressure of being someone who is always giving of oneself. So, given those characteristics and those commonalities, I wanted to talk a little bit about something that caregivers should be thinking about on a conscious level, because that is the goal of mindfulness. It is to do these practices. It is to do the things that will benefit us on a conscious level, so that we can be aware of what we're doing, and also we can measure the impact and the effect of what we're doing. So to move forward with that theory for today, the definition of mindfulness that I want to share today is that it is a moment-to-moment awareness of one's experience without judgment. So once again, What is a definition of mindfulness? It is a moment-to-moment awareness of one's experience without judgment. So focusing on our present state of being without judging it, simply observing it. The theory for this week and for this lesson is on mindful self-compassion. So before we get into the self-compassion part, I just want to ground us in a definition of compassion itself, because most people know what it is if you say that, oh, that person is very compassionate. What does that mean? Typically, it means that a person who is compassionate has the ability to show empathy, to show love, and to show concern for others who may be experiencing difficulty in some way. So mindful self-compassion combines the idea of being mindful, right, fully aware of one's experience, and also compassionate, so having the ability to show empathy, love, and concern for someone who may be going through something difficult, and combining those ideas so that we are using our sense of awareness and our sense of presence by the mindfulness part and focusing it inwards. So that's the difference. Compassion is usually focused outwards. So mindful self-compassion is focused inwards so that we can support our own emotional development and acceptance. Why do we need to do this? Why? Because as I said, most people who consider themselves caregivers or who are considered by others to be caregivers are often not good at giving care to themselves. They usually give care to others at the expense of giving care to themselves. They usually think first about doing things to help and to support, to show that love and care and empathy and all of those wonderful things to other people. And one of the drawbacks of that is that if we continue to always do that, we are not allowing ourselves to be refueled or to be refilled. And as we know, you cannot drive a car with an empty gas tank. You cannot use a phone that hasn't been charged. You cannot pour and receive anything from an empty cup. So it is important that people who are caregivers take the time, make the time to practice mindful self-compassion so that we can continue to do the things that we love for those that we care about. What are the benefits of mindful self-compassion? Well, obviously, one of the biggest benefits is that we will be able to continue to share because that's just who we are and we find satisfaction in doing that. However, there are also other physical and psychological benefits to practicing mindful self-compassion. Research has shown that people who practice mindful self-compassion are less likely to be depressed, anxious, and stressed. Research also finds that people who practice mindful self-compassion tend to be happier, more resilient, and more optimistic about the future. And as far as those physical benefits, the same benefits of mindful self-compassion are the ones that you experience just from practicing mindfulness, and those are better mental and physical health. So one of the concepts that I wanted to talk about today is about selfing versus being selfish. So selfing is a word that I sort of came up with many years ago, and I still think about it often because people confuse selfing with being selfish. And often self-compassion can be confused with self-indulgence or selfishness, but they're very different. Being selfish means that you only think about yourself. However, selfing means that you are thinking about caring for yourself so that you are better able to care for other people. So self-compassion involves the capacity to comfort ourselves. Who comforts the caregiver? Who gives care to the caregiver? The caregiver should essentially first receive care from himself or herself, because self-compassion also provides us with the capacity of motivating ourselves with the encouragement that we need in order to continue on whenever we ourselves are suffering, whenever we fail at something, whenever we feel inadequate, whenever we suffer any of the ailments that we are helping others to move through or to endure. So, moving ahead with the practice for this week. So I want you to think about this, because I think this is one of the easiest ways to incorporate the practice of self-compassion. Because caregivers are so good at giving care to others, what I thought of is that the practice for caregivers could be simply considering ourselves, yourself, to be the person in need of care. Who is that person in need of care the most? It has to be us. In order to do what we want to do, which is to be responsible, be dependable, provide care for others, to show love, to show empathy, to make a difference, to support those that we love and care for, we have to do that for ourselves first. We have to refuel. We have to make sure that we have in us what we need before we can give that out to other people. So one of the ways to do that is to think about a close friend that you have, and to think about how much you care for this person, and to think about how you treat that person. So of course, all of the good thoughts and feelings should be coming up right now. And I want you to think about directing those thoughts and feelings to yourself. How would you treat a close friend who is going through a difficult time? What are some of the things that you would say to him or her? What are some of the things that you would do? If this close friend came to visit you, let's say for a week, all right, because the practice is going to be in place for a week. So let's say this close friend comes to visit you for a week. How would you treat that friend for a week? What would you do with that person for a week? How would you show them that, wow, I've missed you, you're here, and we have a whole week to spend together? What would you do each day to communicate that to your close friend? That's the practice for this week. I want you to think of yourself as a close friend who has come for a visit. What are you going to do? What are you going to say to show that close friend how much you love and care for him or her? That's your practice for this week, and you are going to do that for the next couple of days, and you are going to combine it with the practices that we already sort of put in place. The first one being mindful awakening, and taking your 5 breaths when you wake up, setting your intention for the day, becoming more aware of your thoughts. And in that awareness of your thoughts, you're going to also include now your practice for caring for your close friend, which is yourself. So as you become more aware of your thoughts, if you find yourself thinking anything that would downplay or denigrate your thoughts about self-care, putting it off, thinking to yourself, no, well, I can't do that for myself because I have to do this, or I don't have the time. No, you need to pause, and you need to actually take the time to do what is needed for your close friend, to show him or her that you truly care for him or her, and then to think about turning your attention back outward. So like I did last week, I'm not going to include the meditation in this video just to keep it relatively short, but it is going to be attached in the playlist so that it follows right after this video. So when you are ready to practice the meditation that goes along with self-compassion, you should find it there. If not, you can find it on the YouTube site, which is Intentional Educators, or you can just look that up at Nicolette James. So next week, I would love for you to join me for the last session. I'm really excited because the topic I'm going to talk about is one of my all-time favorites. So I would love for you to be there with me as I talk about it. But in the meantime, you can come along with me on this journey by visiting Intentional Educators on YouTube. You can email me, as I mentioned at the top of the lesson, at intentionaleducators@gmail.com. And you can also stop by to subscribe to my newsletter at educatezen.org. And that is simply a curation of some articles that I think would help other intentional educators to be more, feel better, and do their best in the world. So thank you once again for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next